Welcome to our second presentation about active and passive voice. Please watch this first presentation before you watch this presentation, or you may find it a bit confusing. During our first presentation, we talked about the three methods that we can use to identify passive voice. And by definition, if you're identifying the passive voice, you're identifying that it's not active voice. It's a binary system. You're either one or the other. So we've talked about the three methods. If you need a refresher about those methods, go watch that first video. I'm not going to go over in detail how to use those three methods. Although certainly as we're talking about this next topic, there will be indirectly some discussion of those methods. This presentation isn't about identifying passive voice, and it's not about identifying the active voice. It's about the second step in the process. It's what do we do to take a sentence and turn it to the other voice. And in most cases, what we're going to be interested in doing is taking a passive voice sentence and making it an active voice sentence. So we know how to figure out whether a particular sentence is active voice and a particular sentence is passive voice. But what we haven't talked about, at least not directly yet, is how to change sentences. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Now, there's no great rocket science involved in this. It's probably pretty intuitive what we're going to be doing, but I want to just take a few moments and talk about that process. So we're going to talk about the three steps that are involved in switching a sentence from active voice to passive voice. Okay, so let me go ahead and actually scroll down here. So here we have our 6 steps. And of course, there are 6 steps to do the reverse, to change a sentence from passive voice to active voice. This is the more important skill to be focused on, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. These are the mechanics of how we do this. And again, we're going to be focusing on finding the subject and finding the verb, and going from there. So let's first of all consider identify the subject of the passive voice sentence. So this is a sentence you've already diagnosed. You've already decided it's passive. Bob was eaten by the alligator. Okay, that's our passive voice sentence. So we're going to identify the subject of the passive voice sentence. The subject is typically going to be your first noun or pronoun in the sentence. I'm going to put that in yellow. Is usually the first noun or pronoun in the sentence unless there's some clause in the beginning. So if it's a long sentence, or there's a lot of stuff before the verb, another way of finding it is to find the first noun or verb to the left of, noun or pronoun to the left of the verb. Okay, so next we're going to identify the entire verbal phrase. Remember before we talked about the helping verbs, and we talked about how we really don't need to know helping verbs in order to find passive voice. So we didn't really care about these verbs before, but now we are interested in looking at the helping verbs because they can be part of our verbal phrase. So it may be a good idea to put all 23 of these verbs on some kind of cheat sheet or index card that you have, but do be sure to highlight the ones that tell you whether it's passive voice or not. Once you have these 23 verbs, then you're going to be adding present or past participles to the mix to find your entire verbal phrase. But it's good to know these so that you can identify the entire verbal phrase. Okay, so here we are back with our 6 steps. We've identified our subject. Now we're going to identify the entire verb. And all we have is was eaten. That's our entire verbal phrase. We could imagine that it could be was being eaten, or had been eaten. Now we have had been eaten. And again, if we go back to our list, we'll be able to see that had is one of our helping verbs. Okay, so we've identified the entire verbal phrase. If it's in passive voice, though, we know automatically it's got to have at least 2 words in it because we have to have a to be verb. This is our to be verb. And we have to have a past participle, eaten in this case. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look for a by phrase. Now we know that we don't have to have a by phrase in a sentence, but our particular sentence does have a by phrase. And I'm going to put that, we'll put that in green. Okay. So this is our whole prepositional phrase. This is our object of the preposition. I'm going to make that bright red. Okay. Okay, so these are the parts of the sentence that we need. And actually, by the, I'm actually going to put in gray. Because honestly, when we switch from passive voice to active voice, the word by is going to fall out of the sentence. We're not going to need by in this situation. Okay, so we've identified the 3 parts. This we've done when we've highlighted a Bob, so I'm going to cross that, strike that out. We've identified the entire verb. We're good there. And we've identified the word by and found the object of that preposition, alligator in this case. Okay, so we've done steps 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to actually start manipulating our sentence. Okay, so here we're going. So this is, we're taking our first actions to change a passive voice sentence to an active voice sentence. We're going to switch the positions of the subject and the by object. So our subject is our yellow word, and alligator is our red word is our by object. So I'm just going to switch it. I'm going to say the alligator had been eaten by Bob. Now obviously this is not factually correct. All I did was switch these up, but I'm going to have to do a lot more cleaning up. But we at least have this in the right spot. I'm going to put it back into red. And I'll keep Bob in yellow so you can see what we did. So we have completed step number 4. We're obviously not done. This doesn't make sense. We're not anywhere near complete. Now we're going to eliminate the word by. If the former by object is a pronoun, you may need to change its case. Well, alligator isn't a pronoun, so we don't have to worry about that. Now we're just going to remove the word by. I'm going to cross it out here. So we're done with that. Now we need to rewrite our verbal phrase. This is the hardest part. There are 2 parts to this task that can be difficult. The first is we have to rewrite this so it is an active voice. So generally we're going to make the to be go away, right? That's one of our identifiers. So I'm going to make that go away. And actually in this case, we're done. The alligator had eaten Bob. That is now correct. So I'm going to write it. The alligator had eaten Bob. We have changed. This is the passive sentence. Oops. And this is the active sentence. One of the challenges to taking a sentence from passive voice to active voice, or vice versa, is that what sometimes will happen is that you will do a tense shift. Voice is separate than tense. Let me do a little refresher about this. Let's go back to our sentence here. Bob had been eaten by the alligator. We can put this in lots of different tenses. It's going to stay in passive voice, but let's try in different tenses. Bob was eaten by the alligator. Bob was being eaten by the alligator. Bob is eaten by the alligator. Bob is being eaten by the alligator. Bob will be eaten by the alligator. Bob will be being eaten by the alligator. Bob will have been eaten by the alligator. Bob has been eaten by the alligator. Bob has been being eaten by the alligator. And there are actually additional tenses that you can do with this. You can see that in every single one of these cases, we have a to be verb, to be verb, to be verb, to be verb, to be verb. We have two to be verbs here, to be verb, two to be verbs here, to be verb here, and we have the past participle. So we know in every case we have passive voice. Passive voice is universal, but each one of these is in a slightly different tense. So when we translate these sentences to active voice, we don't want to lose the information the tense is giving us. We know, for example, Bob will be eaten by the alligator means something different than Bob was eaten by the alligator. We know this is something that's going to happen in the future, and this is something that has already happened. Many times when people take a passive voice sentence and translate it to the active voice, though, they don't get the tense right. And a lot of times it's because the past participle in some sense suggests a past tense. You can see here we have eaten here. Even though this is a future action, it's on some level kind of sort of seems like it's happened in the past. And so many times when people translate this sentence into active voice, they will say the alligator ate Bob. Or probably more commonly they will say had eaten Bob or something like that, because many times they like to keep the past participle and just change the sentence from that perspective. And that works oftentimes if you have a past tense. But if we're starting with Bob will have been eaten by the alligator, you can't keep the eaten and make it active voice. You can't say the alligator will eaten Bob. That's not how we say it in English. We'll say the alligator will eat Bob. So you have to be open to the tense. Usually you're going to get the tense information from what is before the past participle. Will have been. So when you see will or shall, that tells you future tense. If you see was or were, that tells you past tense. If you see had, that tells you past tense. If you see is, am, are, or has, that tells you present tense. So those are some things to look for. So let me go back up here and mark these so we can have a piece of data. So as you're trying to diagnose the tense of the sentence, we have these are going to be present tense signals. I'll put those in yellow. These are going to be past tense signals. I'll put these in green. As we're looking at our helping verbs, we'll see did is going to be past tense. What color did I use? Green for past tense. Had will be past tense. And then will and shall will be future tense. Do, does will be present tense. Have, has will be present tense. Just put all these together. So these are your clues. If you listen to your ear, if you stop and think about it or rewrite a sentence with these words in active voice, you'll usually be able to figure out what the grammar, what the tense is. I'm less concerned with you identifying the tense and more concerned at this point with you flipping the sentence from active voice to passive voice. So if you can do the first part, change it from active to passive, and you miss the tense, there's going to be less of a deduction than if you keep the right tense but don't switch it to active voice. So the more important skill, at least at this point in your career, is going to be switching from from passive to active voice. And then it's kind of icing on the cake if you can get the tense right as well. If you can't get all of the nitty-gritty tense parts right, it's also useful if you can at least get into the right category. For example, these are all past tense. These are all present tense. And these are all future tense. So if you can at least get them into the bucket, that's right. That's a good thing. Okay, so let's do another sentence. Let's see if I have anything else. Ever. So one way to confirm that you've actually made the right transition is to make sure you don't still have a to be verb and a past participle. Now you may well have a to be verb and you may well have a past participle. That's okay. You just don't want to have both. Okay, so let's do another sentence. Let's rewrite. I was hit by a ball. That's going to be our sentence. And let's go through the 6 steps that we just did. I guess I actually paste. Okay, so let's go through our 6 steps again. So the first thing is to identify the subject. Again, it's typically going to be your first noun or pronoun. In this case, it'll be a pronoun, I. I'm going to put that in yellow. If I had a lot of stuff going on in the sentence, the other way to identify it would be to identify the verb and go to the left. And again, I would also find I. So finding the subject is pretty easy in this case. Now I'm going to find the verb. Well, if I used method 1, I will have already found the to be verb was and my irregular past participle hit. So I have that. I'm going to put that in pink. It's a simple verb. These are the only 2 parts of the verb. So I don't need to look, but I could go back and look at my words. I have as my helper nouns do, does, did, have, has, had, could, should, would, may, must, might, can, will, shall. And going back, we'll see nope, don't have any of those words in it. So we've done steps 1 and steps 2. Now we're down to step 3. We're going to look for the word by. We actually have it in this sentence, so I'm going to highlight by. I'm going to put it in gray. Now I'm going to look for the object of that preposition. The object is going to be to the right or after it. Many times it'll be directly after it. In this case it is. So I'm going to put that in blue. So I found the by, and then I found the object. So we're good to go. We've identified all of our parts. Now we're ready to do the switch. We're going to switch the blue, which is the object of the preposition, with the yellow. A ball was hit by I. So we've done that. Doesn't sound right. It's far from right, but that's an intermediate step. Now we're going to eliminate the word by, our gray text right here. Actually, before we do that, let me go ahead and mark our items so we can keep track of everything that we have going on in our sentence. Okay, so we're going to get rid of the by. That's the first part. Because we had after the by the word ball, we don't have to change it because it's a noun, so we don't change its case. But we do have a pronoun here. A ball was hit I. Well, it's pretty rare that we use the word I at the end of the sentence. Let's stop and talk a little bit about case. This is an idea that we don't think a lot about in English. If you've ever studied Latin or German, you've probably been exposed a little bit to the idea of case. In certain languages, the suffixes of nouns change depending upon how it's being used in the sentence. We don't do that for the most part in English. There's a couple of exceptions, which I'm not going to get into at this point, but we usually don't change it when it's a noun, but we do usually change it when it's a noun. So for example, if I say, I love him, that means something different than he loves me, right? And yet we have the same ideas here. We have me, this person, we have him, that person over there, and we have the idea of love. But we know from word order that word order is important in English. So for example, this would sound weird if I say, me love he. Or how, yeah, me loves he, for example. Or how about this? Him loves I. There's a disconnect. We're not quite sure what's meant because we have two competing systems in English. We have word order, and word order tells us, well, if we don't have a passive voice structure, and obviously none of these are passive voice because there's no to be verb and there's no past participle. So when we have active voice, we believe or we expect that on the left side of the verb we'll have the doer. I love him. And here we have our verb again. And so we're expecting on the left side of the verb the doer. Well, me means I, Cynthia Gruber. Here we have the verb again, and we have he. Oops, sorry, wrong color. And this is to the left of the verb. That's telling us who's doing the action of loving. And we have loves again here, and we have him, meaning he. And so this position in the sentence suggests that these four words are doing the action. But there's another competing system we have, and that is case. We change pronouns to reflect their role in the sentence. So I love him sounds right to us. Me loves he doesn't sound right because the word me shouldn't be the subject of a sentence. The word him shouldn't be the subject of the sentence. If we're making it the subject of the sentence, we ought to say he, not him. If we're making me the subject of the sentence, we ought to say I, not me. So in English, the subject pronouns are I, we, he, she, it. Switch this, put you up here. You, and they. The object pronouns are, and these are going to I'm going to have them directly below, is we have me instead of I, us instead of we, you doesn't change, him instead of he, her instead of she, it doesn't change, and we have them instead of they. So for the most part, they do change. We have this that doesn't, and we have this that doesn't, but the other forms do change. And so that's why we have this disconnect here. We think it should be I love him, not me loves he. And so when we hear this, we're not sure who's doing the loving. The word order suggests I am the one loving, but the case suggests he is the one loving. I think for most of our ears, we probably think word order is more important than case. And so we probably still interpret this to mean the same thing as I love him, but we know that it's grammatically incorrect. But it's possible that at least there's a question mark about what it means. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about case. A ball was hit, I. Well, now in this sentence, the I is receiving the hit. I'm being hit by the ball, so I'm receiving the action. The ball is, grazing my forehead or whatever. Well, that suggests that the I should be the object. And so I ought to replace this with me. And so that is when we're talking about changing pronouns, we're talking about making sure it's the right case. So in a sentence, if you have one of these words in your sentence, you're probably, and you're changing it from passive voice to active voice, you're probably going to need to, when you flip it around, to also change it to its companion word. I to me, we to us, or it could be me to I, us to we. Him to her, him to he, or he to him, her to she, or she to her, them to they, or they to them. Okay, so now we have corrected that. We've now done step 5. We've eliminated the by and we've changed the case. I'm going to get rid of these so we can get everything on one screen. So this is our revised sentence right here. Now we're to the last stage. We need to revise our verb. Okay, well, in this case, we can just remove the was. A ball hit me. That means the same thing as I was hit by the ball. Hit is the past participle, but as is often the case, when we have a past participle, it can is in the same form as the past tense verb. This sentence was in past tense. So we can simply say, a ball hit me, and we have a correct sentence. But let's try a different tense. I will be hit by a ball. This is our original sentence. Okay, well again, similarly, we can just remove the be and it will be correct. A ball will hit me. That is a common way to fix it. A common way to fix a verb is simply to remove the to be verb. It doesn't work every time though, but that is one strategy to consider, but be sure to read the sentence to make sure it's correct. And make sure it's active voice. A ball will hit me. Yes, that is correct. And look, it's in the same tense as I will be hit by a ball. So we've been successful at making that transition. Now let's do the reverse. Just so we can have that experience, let's go change a sentence from active voice to passive voice. Oh, wait a second. Before we do that, let's consider another scenario. Let's consider a sentence in which we don't know. Or actually, let's consider a sentence that we have a pronoun in the by expression. The man was killed by her. So let's go through our steps. to make this correct. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is identify the subject. That's going to be the man. It's the beginning of the sentence. It's before our verb. We have our verb was killed. We have the to be word was. We have our past participle killed. We have a by already built into the sentence. And we have an object of that prepositional phrase. We have her. So we have all of our parts. So we've identified 1 through 3. We're now ready to start changing our sentence. We're going to switch the positions of the subject, the yellow, and the baby blue, the by object. So it's now going to be her was killed by the man. All we've done is switch this up. So I'm going to color it so you can see the parts. And then all I've done is done a switcheroo here. Oops, wasn't successful at doing that. Here we go. And now we have okay. Now so I've done the step 4. Now we're going to do step 5, which again is going to be 2 parts. I'm going to remove the by, but because I did have a preposition, I'm going to go up to my cheat sheet. I have her in my initial sentence, so I'm going to need to switch it to she. She was killed, the man. Okay, so I have eliminated by and I've switched the pronoun. So now we're ready to rework the verb. In this case, again, we can just eliminate the to be verb, was. She killed the man. The man was killed by her. By making this one change, we've moved from active voice, past tense, from passive voice, past tense. Okay, let's consider another task. So we're going to go back to our sentence, the man was killed. But we're going to remove by her. We've decided when we write a sentence that we don't want to say who killed the man. Maybe we don't know, maybe it's not important to this story. This is our original sentence, okay? You can see that I've identified the subject and I've identified the verb. We've looked for the word by, but we can't find it. So there's nothing to find there, it's missing. So we've done steps 1, 2, and 3. Now we're supposed to switch the positions of the subject and the by object. We don't have a by object, so I'm just going to put a blank here. You can see I've made that switch. And again, this blank is where we would have had, I'm just going to add it here just for pretend for a second, just so we can see the structure. Okay? So we've switched these spots. And now we don't have to eliminate the word by because we didn't actually have it. We don't have any prepositions in this sentence, so we don't have to worry about step 5. So now we're concerned with changing the verb. Well, we can do the same thing in this sentence that we did when we had by her. We're just going to remove the word was, and then we're good. So blank killed the man. Now, in this case, because we're talking about, I guess, a person, we could say someone killed the man. Or maybe it's a disease. Something killed the man. Or we could say somebody. Or we could, whatever we want to add. Obviously, we can't have a blank. So you'll have to look to context to see what noun or pronoun will have the same meaning under the circumstances. Again, that's one of the reasons why people use passive voice, because when you don't know the agent that has done the action, passive voice is an easier way of writing. In active voice, you can omit the agent by saying something like someone or something, but you do have to literally have a word that is acting as the agent, even if it's very unspecific. Okay, so those are the steps to change a sentence from a passive voice to active voice. Now we're going to just experiment a little bit from the switch from active voice to passive voice. This isn't a skill that you're going to use very often. You're not going to need, it's going to be rare that you're going to have an active voice sentence that you look at and go, boy, I really wish I could write this in passive. But I did give a couple of examples when last we were together in last lecture, where there might be a particular fact that you feel like you need to share with the court, to be candid with the court, but you just want to make it very boring and tedious and confusing so that the court can't say, ah, you left out that important fact, but you haven't engaged in any kind of obfuscation, but you, or at least any direct hiding, but you've at least muddied the water enough so it's a little bit more difficult for the reader to get that. Okay, so let's start with an active voice sentence. Larry drove Bob to the airport. Okay, this is an active voice sentence because we have our verb is drove. We don't have any to be. The past participle of drove is driven, so we don't have even a past participle in this sentence. That's method one. Method two, we look to the left of the verb. We have Larry. Is Larry driving the car? He sure is. So method number two tells us that it's active voice. If I were to add by a blue monkey to this sentence, Larry drove Bob to the airport by a blue monkey. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but insofar as it does make sense, presumably the blue monkey is hanging around the airport. So all of our tests tell us it's active voice. Now we're going to switch it to passive, and we're going to follow basically the same process that we used when we were changing a sentence from passive voice to active voice. We're first going to identify the subject of our active voice sentence. That's going to be Larry, same way we found it before. It's usually going to be our first noun or pronoun in the sentence. Again, if it's a long introduction, we might instead want to look for the verb and look to the left. But either way, we're going to end up with Larry. Then we're going to identify the entire verb. We don't have a to be verb, and we don't have any of those helping verbs. We can go back and look at the list if we're not sure. Do, does, did, have, has, had, could, should, would, may, must, might, can, will, shall, and then am, are, is, was, were, be, being, been. We don't have any of those words in this sentence, so we have our entire verbal phrase. Now we're going to identify the direct object. Not every active voice sentence is going to have a direct object, but this one does. Bob is receiving the action of the drive. He's being driven there. So now we're going to switch the two positions here. So I'm going to put the green word first, keep the verb in its place, and move the yellow word. And then I'm going to tack on our, this is a prepositional phrase, to the very end. Let me just make the color clear so you can see what I've done. Oops. And now we have Larry. Okay, so we have taken actions 1, 2, and 3. And now we've taken action number 4. We've switched the positions of those words. Okay, now we're going to want to put the word by in front of the former subject, in front of our yellow word. So I'm going to say by. Now Larry is a noun, so we don't have to worry about case. But if it were, well, we'll talk about that contingency in a couple of minutes. So we're good to go with this one. And now we're ready to change the verb. Well, we don't have a to be verb, and we don't have a past participle. But we know how to make our past participle. So we have drove here. We could just type it in. Of course, drove is past tense for drive, but let's say we don't even know that. So we want past participle of drove. Let's see. irregular verb definition. Let's see if it's going to give us here. Here we go. So we can look here. Past participle is driven. Okay, so we're going to go back to our word here. And so we are going to switch drove to driven. And now we need to have a to be verb. Okay, well, since this verb is past tense, we'll need to have a past tense to be verb. So we go look up here, and remember our past tense ones were the ones in green. This is past tense. So we're going to use was or were. Okay, well, obviously with Bob, we're going to use was. Bob is singular, so we use was. And so we've gone from Larry drove Bob to the airport to Bob was driven by Larry to the airport. And actually, you could put to the airport in front of by Larry if you wanted. The order is somewhat at your discretion. So these mean the same thing. One's passive voice and one is active voice. So we have completed this task. Okay, I'm going to switch things up a little bit, and I'm going to make this he drove her to the airport. That's our initial sentence. Okay, so let's get started identifying our parts. Again, we have as our object he. It is our first noun or pronoun in the sentence. In this case, it's a pronoun, and it's to the immediate left of our verb. Our verb hasn't changed. Now we're going to look for our direct object. Again, it's going to be a noun or pronoun, and it's usually going to happen right after the verb. And we're going to put that in green. Okay, now we're going to, so we've done parts 1, 2, and 3, and now we're going to switch the position. So we're going to say, her drove he to the airport. So her is our green word. Drove is in its same position as the verb, and he is our yellow word. So we've completed that task. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. We completed, oops. Now we're ready for number 4. We're going to add the by word in front of the former subject, in front of the yellow word. Okay. If the former subject is a pronoun, we're going to have to change its case, or at least think about it. Let's go back to our list of cases. Where do I have that? Okay. So when we have he, we're going to switch it to him. So we have he, we're going to make it him. We also need to think about our subject. We have her here. Whenever we switch a word, we have to consider switching the case. We had her initially, we're going to have to switch it to she. If we had she initially, we'd have to switch it to her. So we're going to switch her to she. So we have taken care of the by and the preposition problem. Now we're ready to rewrite the verb. Okay, well, we've already figured out that the past participle of drove or drive is driven. So we're going to put that in here. And drove is past tense, so we'll need to use a verb that is a to-be verb that is past tense, and so we'll use was. So we started out, he drove her to the airport, and now we have she was driven by him to the airport. They mean the same thing. The only difference is one is passive, the other is active. They have the same tense. So we are done with that task. Hopefully this has helped you make a little bit more sense about it. Again, please please watch this video more than once if everything wasn't clicking. Note any questions that you have. Play around with other sentences. Another thing to consider doing is going through lots of other sentences. Practice it, and if you get to a sentence that you're just not sure whether it's passive or active, come see me and we will work through how to diagnose a sentence and also how to change it. I hope that this video has been helpful for you. Thank you for your attention and have a great evening.